Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the podcast. I'm Nick, and I'm excited you're listening as today we're going to talk with Terrace Crawford, a veteran youth worker who does a lot of things to help youth leaders all around. And we talk about helping students serve. What does it look like to help students serve in our churches, to serve outside the walls of our church? And so I think this will be really helpful to you. Even if you lead in children's ministry, there are ways that we can push kids to serve. We can help students serve in the ministry. And so regardless of where your role fits, I think you'll want to listen to this today. And I know for me personally, I grew up attending church, and I took some of my biggest steps of faith serving as a student in middle school, but particularly in high school. And so I think that's important, not just because it was important to me, but it seems like time and time again, what we see is serving might be one of the biggest things that helps grow the faith of a high school student. And so we talk about what that looks like and how we can encourage that. If you haven't yet, I would love for you to leave a review of the podcast on iTunes. That really helps get it in front of other leaders, helps people find that. You can do that. Just go to iTunes, find the podcast there, and click rating and review and leave a review and a comment. I'd appreciate that. You can get the show notes, so everything we talk about, books and different resources, Terrace's podcast, all of that you can get in the show notes. Just go to nickblevins.com/episode 24. But let's go ahead and jump into my interview with Terrace Crawford. Today I'm joined by Terrace Crawford. Terrace, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Nick. How's it going?
Doing well. How about yourself?
Doing well, man.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do now and kind of how you got there, a little bit of your journey in ministry.
Do you want me to start back when I was born?
I don't know. It depends. If it's interesting and it'll help us out, who knows? Probably not. Some people might get a little queasy.
Well, I would say coming out of college, I was a part of a radio outreach, a radio station, large market radio station, Columbia, South Carolina, and then worked there for a few years, and then ended up navigating into the church world, joining church staff. And even while I was in college, and even prior to that, I've been working in youth ministry for years. So just about 20 years youth ministry experience. It's hard to believe I feel so old when I say that.
Just pretend you started when you were 10 or whatever.
Exactly. I started right out of the womb.
Yeah, exactly. You're like 25.
But anyway, ended up going full-time into youth ministry after that. And I've worked with a couple of different churches and parachurches. And so over the years in youth ministry, I've done a lot of other stuff in addition to that. And one thing that I think is near and dear to my heart is equipping leaders. And I've really tried to be a resource to youth workers, specifically over the last 10 years of what I've experienced in this 20-year run so far. So that's what I've kind of been doing.
And you stepped out of working full-time at a church about a year ago, right? And so what's that transition been like where now because you had a season there where you kind of did both, you were in both worlds, so to speak, and now you're out of that and fully just equipping other leaders and speaking at churches and doing some coaching and things like that. What's that transition been like?
It's been interesting. I would say about 6 months prior to my decision to step out of the church world, or a church role, not church world. Still go to church, but stepping down from church staff, and that was really a sort of lengthy process, and trying to figure out if that's what God wanted me to do at the time. And I think it's for a season. I'm not opposed to actually stepping back into a church role, maybe even down the road, but God really sort of nudged me out, and I have been doing what I've been doing for a long time, and that's helping youth workers and resourcing and equipping them, and not really limited youth workers. I do it with church leaders as well. But it's been an amazing ride. From writing to coaching, and of course the podcast, and so many other things that a lot of people just know me for.
I've asked this of a couple other leaders who've been in a similar spot. Is there anything you've learned different or new doing that more and more? Stepping out and doing it kind of full time of youth leaders, of youth ministry. I mean, was there any different perspectives you got that would be helpful for you who's still right in it?
Absolutely. You really don't. For one thing, you don't understand the pressure that leaders are under. And the pressure of ministry, the grind of ministry until you're out of that role. And I kind of liken it to, Nick, it's like when you go on vacation, I'm sure you probably understand this. When you go on vacation and it takes like 2 to 3 days to really decompress and actually, be on vacation.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's sort of like that on a larger scale. And it's so interesting. And for me, it was layers. There were lots of layers to really pulling out of that church role. And the first was really kind of surprising to me. It was, I didn't really have the obligation that I had to tell somebody to get to youth group or or to go to church or promote the next big event or something like that. And so now, if I just encourage people to go to church, it's on my own volition. But I didn't have to peddle anything as far as church was. And I know it might sound really brass or selfish or whatever, but I think people might understand that. It was, imagine if you're a youth worker listening to this and you didn't have the obligation or necessity to be somewhere at a certain time for youth group, or you didn't have to put something together. You didn't have to promote it. And the thing is, we have such a broad scope of, and I still speak to this currently as a youth worker, as a church worker, there's such a broad scope sometimes, specifically for the youth worker. The senior pastor might not have as much, but, or much of the same, but as a youth worker, sometimes you're like, you're doing from A to Z. I mean, you're dreaming it, you're putting it together, you're delegating, you're marketing. Sometimes you're even doing, graphics and things. You are doing the whole scope of it from start to finish. And there's just so much work to be done. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of work to do. And the job of a youth worker is never done. You can spend all day in the office or even at Starbucks and, your work is never, ever done.
Yeah. I always say it's like, leading a whole church. I mean, most student ministries, the way they operate, it's basically the same concept as leading the entire church, just for students specifically. Because a lot of times you're having some form of large group and small groups and care and administration and trips, retreats and graphics and, you know what I mean? But without usually the team, because you're right, most youth workers are doing it. They have a volunteer team, but not the staff team. So the other thing is a challenge.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is I've learned a lot about self-care, Nick. Since stepping out of a church role, we talk a lot about self-care as leaders. And I've certainly talked about it in my role as a coach to youth pastors and on the podcast and things like that. It's a great topic. It's a hot topic, but we just don't do it. We don't do a good job of it. We don't do a good job of taking a Sabbath. We don't do a good job of really taking time for ourselves. And, that's one thing that I really saw, not immediately, but over time as I've stepped out, is to really, really do the work of taking care of yourself. And I began to see over time that, I was even a little toxic and I had become, complacent to some things and just really burned and burnt out. And just there was a lot of that in the mix. And I think a lot of it can be chalked up to I just wasn't as healthy as I thought I was. And I think it's a continual process. I think it's a day by day process. I'm not sure when this is airing, but we just saw a church leader who is really nationally known and internationally known step down from his position, and he cited that he was tired, he was broken, and he needed rest. And I really admonished that. I think that was a really brave decision to kind of get ahead of that and say, hey, I'm not healthy and I need to really do the work of taking care of myself. And, I think that more churches, more leaders need to do the work of self-care and not just talk about it.
Absolutely. Do you have, especially having had the time now to focus that on for yourself, do you have any specific things that you would recommend or, to the leader who's in it right now and maybe isn't prioritizing it?
Let me be clear. I don't spend 24 hours a day self-care.
Oh, really? That's too bad.
I'm not sipping Mai Tais on the beach. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing that.
But
I'm definitely busy and I find stuff to do to fill my day. I'm still trying to find time to cut the front lawn. I got to mow the lawn.
Unfortunately.
But
some people love that. It's like it is sort of like self-care. Not me. I don't know about you, but not me.
But I don't know. I think that again, just taking that time. I think it's a different pace. It's definitely a different pace coming out of a church role. Now, I get to typically determine what's on my agenda and what's on my calendar, versus it be determined for me by a boss or by leadership. So that's different.
What if you do have the boss? For those who are listening who are still in the role, how do you think they can take hold of this and really make some time for self-care?
Well, again, I think it's a day by day decision. I definitely understand the grind, and I think that I've encouraged youth workers as I've coached them to don't apologize for making time for yourself. Make sure that you make those appointments. And I did that even in a church role, and still do that now. But I think that that's something that you have to do in order to prioritize what's important. And what's important is yourself. And nobody's going to take care of yourself. Nobody's going to take care of number one. Your church is not going to look at you and say, boy, you just need, you need to just take a full week off right now. Just forget Easter services, forget Christmas, and just go and do your thing. They're not necessarily going to do that. They're not going to jump at just pushing you out. In fact, sometimes they want you to work over, and they won't apologize for it. And not every church is like that. There are some churches that are taking better care of their staff than others. But the important thing is that you have to prioritize that, and you have to make that happen for yourself. It's even like working out. Nobody's going to push you to the gym. Nobody's going to get you there. You have to determine that that's a priority for you. And so I think that that's really critical, whether you're in a church role or not, or whatever you're doing, that we all have to make those appointments for ourselves and just set aside that time. If you have the ability to, block off a couple hours in the afternoon or a couple hours in the morning and say, this is my time for myself, whether it's reading or whether it's taking a walk in the park or going to the gym or whatever is going to fill you up, whatever is going to energize you and fuel you. We have to do that, and we have to be unapologetic about it.
That's good. I know, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this on here before, but another leader that our church loves and respects, who's kind of helped our church when we were getting started, even now he'll talk about, he does a soul day is what he calls it, once a month, 1 day, 8 hours, no technology, just time with God, and that can look like whatever he wants. And he'll point to that as the most kind of refreshing, life-giving thing for him in a month, more than praying every day or reading his Bible every day. So who knows? And sometimes I just know like it is hard to make time, day in and day out with the busyness. But I think our team has found one day a month or even a half a day a month. It's still hard, but it's easier to keep. You know what I mean? Than maybe something you're trying to get every day. So that could be something people do. Yeah,
and you have to do what works for you. I think biblically speaking, there's a rhythm that God wants us to have, and that one day a week is important.
Yep.
So I think the ultimate goal and the ideal thing is to have that one day a week. I've certainly had times in my life where my schedule just would not accommodate that, and so I would do like a half day on Friday and a half day on Saturday. So I mean, I think you got to do what works for you. I love that 8-hour idea. That's good. I think that's cool. That 8 hour a month, but it's really finding your rhythm and finding what works for you and going with it.
Yeah, the advantage, of course, is he encourages his staff to do it. They get to do it during the normal time they'd be working. So at least not like you're always busy, so that's hard. But it's easier than like some other folks who don't have that.
So they're actually getting paid to take the time for themselves. Is that what
exactly,
you're saying?
Yeah, because he really wants them to prioritize it so much. Well, and obviously it's important to him, so that he's he leads his staff to do the same.
That's good.
So we want to talk a lot, spend the rest of our time mostly talking about students serving and helping students serve. But before that, I just want to hit on your book, Going Social, A Practical Guide for Church Leaders. Tell us about the book and how churches and leaders can use that.
Well, the book's been out for a few years, but churches, I think churches, even today, it's still relevant today, even though the book's been out for a few years. Churches today really have a almost missed opportunity on using social media and leveraging it for Christ and for the advancement of the kingdom. And the way I kind of explain that in the book is that there's so many companies and organizations now that, for years now, since social media really has existed, Nick, that they have really taken the opportunity to meet their customers and to engage with them. And, I think that engagement is really critical. And, the thing is, back in the day, the foyer of the church, sort of the entryway of the church was the place where people hung out. That's where everybody communed. That's where everybody, would talk and engage with each other and really get to know one another. And that still does happen. For some churches, it's a coffee shop or, a larger room within their church building. That still happens, but it's happening online and it happens daily. And that's the thing is that, we've got to meet our community where they are, where they're already talking. And so that's really I think sort of the nudge and thrust of the book is that we need to meet our community where they are, where they're already engaged and have conversations with them and, spiritual or not, and just really build that relationship with them. And so that's a sort of the thrust of the book, the central message, I would say. But it's also very practical. I do step-by-step instructions on setting up social media accounts, and I think one of my favorite things about the book in itself, favorite things about my own book, but one of the favorite things that I think I did in the book is in the last chapter, I sort of chronicled 20 different leaders and organizations and how they were leveraging social media for good. And I kind of told their story of how they're using it. So I think it's a great resource. People are still reading it, and I'm fascinated about how God has used the book to help other leaders.
That's awesome. And I would say a lot of times, two of the big mistakes that the book helps address is, one, you just don't use it at all or enough. Or two, it's used like a megaphone or like a billboard, and you really push the community part, like, engage, build engagement. That's good. That's really good. So as we talk about helping students serve. I think all of us think it's important, but I'd love to hear you start just with your take on why this is important from your experience in, youth ministry all those years.
Well, I would say early on, I was not using students or allowing students to serve as a youth pastor. I think I was sort of the one-man band, so to speak. Like I put everything together. I ran with the program. I did the promotion. I did everything from A to Z, and expected students to show up. And over time, I learned that was really not the best way, and that was really not. Honestly, it wasn't even God's design. It wasn't in the best interest for the youth ministry. It definitely wasn't in my best interest, and it wasn't God's design. And so I think that, as I was thinking about this the other day, youth workers, I think their end goal as a family minister, your end goal, you want students to be fully engaged, fully devoted, fully serving with all their heart, right? That's the end goal. And so why not start there? Why not start with the end goal? Why not allow students to do the work of the ministry, regardless of whether they're good at it or not, and start allowing them to have the opportunity to serve and do it along with them, coach them as they are serving. And, I think that that's a win even from the beginning, if you just allow them up front to start, and you start with your end goal.
Did you put that in place and then see a difference, between when you didn't have it and when you did?
Yeah, immediately. Once I started allowing the students to really take the initiative, and and there's a lot to that. I think you have to, you of course have to really begin to discern who is a leader, and give them opportunities. So there's a lot to that in setting that up. But once you identify those leaders who are capable of stepping into that, those roles, and then just walking alongside of them and giving them that opportunity, they really start to thrive in it. And the thing is, it's sort of multifaceted. There's so many layers to it. They have that opportunity to serve. You have also, whether you realize it or not, directly or indirectly, you have given them sort of a vote of confidence that you believe in them, because you have selected them or nudged them into leadership. And so, they have that going for them. And then they have that opportunity to really do something themselves. They have a chance to really own the youth ministry. And then while they're doing that work of serving, they're going to get excited about it, and they're going to tell their friends, and they're going to invite more friends to your youth ministry. So there's so many different levels and layers to having students serve, that it's a win. You cannot lose if you put students in serving positions. Yeah,
that's good. Do you have examples of some of the roles they served in? Because it sounds like what we're talking about here specifically is you had them serve in this youth ministry environment, whatever that was. But I'd love to hear what are some of the specific roles they served in, and what that looked like for anybody who's not doing that.
Yeah, they served in the youth ministry, but they also served in quote unquote big church too. They served church wide in our ministry, and I've done this in several churches that I've worked in. You have to take this opportunity to allow students to serve and to use their God-given potential, and really their spiritual gifts, that they are part of the body. And I think obviously when we look at Timothy in the Bible, Paul was giving Timothy that same opportunity. Timothy was a young boy. He was a teen. And so Paul gave him that opportunity to serve, and he was his coach. And, I think we need to follow that biblical model and allow students to serve in that way. And I would say start on a small scale. You can't just throw, a student. You could, but it might not end.
It might not end well.
But, give students sort of, I hate to use this word, but bite-sized opportunities, in order to buy in to your ministry, and we have to do this with adults too, honestly. It's not just limited to students, but you've got all sorts of things from picking up trash, to setting up chairs, to, greeting people at the door, to, helping support a game, that's being initiated, to speaking. I mean, there's so many different places to serve in your ministry. Don't be afraid to say, hey, honestly, most people can set up a chair. I mean, you ask a student, hey, can you help me set up these chairs? Or, hey, can you set up these chairs? And they might need a chart to see exactly how you want them positioned. but anybody can do that. Anybody can pick up trash. Anybody can, do some of these roles and these positions that we have in our churches. We all need these different things done. And so I would say start small, give them something bite-sized. And then, it's sort of like biblically speaking, the parable of the talents, when you have, been entrusted with some and you've done well with it, then you'll get more. And that's exactly what we can do as leaders, is that once we see students serving and they pick up that piece of trash, or they set up the chairs nicely, or whatever, let them do that for a little bit, let them do that for a few weeks, and then say, hey, in addition to setting up the chairs, maybe try this area over here too. Maybe, do this on the backside of it. Or instead of setting up the chairs, why don't you greet people at the door? Let's try that out, and don't be afraid to give them opportunities to flourish. And you're going to want to, see where they thrive, because not every student is good at greeting people at the door.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Someone might not say a word. Just wait.
That I can tell you firsthand, that is sometimes a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But you're gonna want to discern where they're best served, and where they're going to thrive, and you'll quickly find out where that is.
We've always had students serving, and a lot of that has been because our student ministry main environment doesn't happen during the service. So we want them to attend the service, which means they're also more free to serve. But there was definitely a shift. I don't know if you experienced this. We really benefited from having myself and our student pastor really advocate for student serving in other ministries, because when it wasn't, we hadn't done that. They were serving, but there was definitely a sense of almost in this ministry, they're kind of like just bonus people. We don't really count them as regular volunteers.
Right.
And then over here, you got some leaders in preschool, I'm thinking of specifically, who maybe had a hard time with some students, and so they're not thrilled about the idea of having them in the room. And so there was almost this mindset that we needed to change that we hadn't even realized until we got into it. Had you seen that before? Any recommendations about how to push through that? Because I think that is a barrier,
Yeah, I think you just have to. Honestly, I think people I think churches sometimes are really just scared of trial and error, and a lot of things come down to trial and error, Nick. When you're in leadership, is that you sometimes just have to try it, see if it works, and if it doesn't, don't be afraid to kill it. And give people an opportunity to serve, give people an opportunity to try something, and if it doesn't work well, then don't be afraid to change it.
Yeah, and that probably speaks to what some of the other folks were experiencing, because I guess in their mind they're thinking this isn't a trial. I'm stuck with, let's say there is a student who's not, which this can, we all know this happens with adult volunteers. This is not limited to students. But maybe I'm stuck with a student who's really not, their heart's not into it. It's more trouble, than help. And in their mind, the leader might be thinking, well, this isn't a trial. I'm stuck. But that's not true, because it was a trial for us.
Yeah, and I think being upfront about that is really, really crucial. I think sometimes churches put people in positions just to fill positions. But I think that we need to be upfront with them. Two things that are good. One is being upfront with that student or even adult about how long the position will last. Saying to them, "Hey, why don't you try this for X amount of weeks, and let's see how you do, see how you enjoy it, see how it goes." And then reevaluate it after a few weeks. And you got to be on top of it and actually keep your word and come back to them, within a few weeks and sort of sit down and say, "Hey, let's talk about how it's going." And then the other thing is, don't be afraid to have limited amounts of time for people to serve in positions. I know some churches that say, "Hey, we want you to serve in this position for a year. Just the school year. And then when the summer comes, we're going to move you into a different position." And so every summer they're moving into a different position. So I think that's good. I'm not saying ideally a whole school year's best, but it seems to work for a lot of churches. And so for a lot of people, they don't mind committing for that full year. For other churches, it might be a good 6 months. You might just say, "Hey, for this semester, for this fall, or for this spring, or just this summer, do this particular role, fill this particular role and serve in this particular position. And then next semester we'll move you somewhere else." So I think those time parameters are really good. And I think people like the flow of seasons. I think it works really well, and churches have found it really effective.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. Because like the gut response, if you don't do it, is you're afraid. Like they're all going to quit, after the year. Yeah. But what you've seen is probably what I've seen, that churches that do it, the retention's probably better. Just knowing you could step down helps you stick longer.
And there's less burnout when you do that. If you leave somebody in a position for more than a year, you're going to see more burnout.
Now, how about students? We're talking about student serving, obviously, within the church. How about, what are your thoughts on students serving outside the walls of the church, whether it's mission trips or serving in the community in different ways? What are your thoughts about that and how that's helpful and how churches could do that?
I think it's huge. I really do. I think there needs to be projects outside the church where students are able to serve. And I think there's something to be said for it being done corporately, as a youth group. You get your youth group together and, have different projects that you are doing with each other outside the walls of your church. I think that that builds character. I think it builds community among your youth ministry, and it's obviously honoring to God as well.
Yeah, I know on your podcast you talk about, you kind of work with Experience Mission, which is a great organization to help students serve. And fortunately, there's a lot more of those. I grew up in church and student ministry, and those trips were easily some of the top moments of my life to help grow my faith. But now it's even easier, I would say, right? Because there's organizations that can help you do that, which is huge. Speaking of the podcast, anybody that doesn't, I'm sure most people that listen to This Week in Youth Ministry, but if they don't, they should jump on there. You've had a lot of awesome guests on there. Anything you want to tease for the podcast come up? This will release probably in about 4 or 5 weeks. Or any ones you want to point back to that people should listen to?
Well, definitely enjoy the podcast. It's been a great medium to connect with other youth workers and family ministers. We have a lot of folks that listen, including parents and teenagers, surprisingly. So a lot of people gather at the table each week, and we talk about youth ministry related topics. And definitely enjoy the guests that are on the show. I would say there's not many episodes that I haven't really enjoyed. There's not many episodes, not even a handful, that I would say aren't worth listening to. I would say there's definitely a number of them that you have to listen to. And I would say, based on our topic today of student serving, go and check out any topic on the podcast over the last, I think we're on like episode 73, 74 right now. So go back into the archives and check out any topic related to student serving or a student ministry team or anything like that, because we've had some really great conversations on that. Apart from that, I would say probably some of my favorite episodes have been like the one with Rob Bell. I know Rob Bell's a very controversial figure in the church world today, but you have to listen to that episode. It's our most downloaded, highest rated episode yet, of course. But he says some things there to church leaders and youth pastors specifically that I think was golden. And we've had, of course, Perry Noble on, and we've had Mark Matlock on, and Josh Griffin was on recently. There's a lot of different notable leaders that have been on there that are really worth your time. So I would encourage you to check it out.
Yeah, and you talked with Josh about kicking off fall, right? Which by the time people hear this, fall will be going a little bit, but it's still helpful. Content.
Yeah. We had a great talk on starting fall strong, and he actually talked a little bit in that episode about winter and even summer ideas. So I think it's relevant no matter when you listen to it.
That's awesome. Well, how else can people connect with you?
Well, I'm all over social media, so
hopefully, based on the book, right?
You can definitely connect with me there. Most of my handles are at Terrace Crawford, so that's where to find me. Love connecting through the blog, terracecrawford.com/blog, and then of course the podcast is a great place to connect to. So appreciate the interview today.
Thanks for joining us. This has been really helpful.
Absolutely, man. Anything I can do for you guys listening, please reach out to me. Don't hesitate to contact and become a friend.
Definitely. Thanks, Terrace.
Thanks, Nick.
Terrace's podcast is awesome, and I definitely recommend you listen to that. He mentioned some of those episodes that have been really, really good. Here's some other action items I had coming out of our conversation that you can take to, put some of this into action and see some results from it. One is to get his book Going Social and have some conversations about your church and how your church or ministry can leverage social media to grow community, because that's the goal. And so you can get that and take some steps there. Another step would be to identify clear roles and needs in your church where students could serve. So what are the teams and ministries they could serve on? How can we promote that and encourage them to serve in those ways? And what steps do we need to take to make sure they have a good experience? I remember Frank Beeler one time. We had Frank on episode 2 of the podcast. And Frank mentioned one time that he had asked his team to think about what is it like to serve as a student. And I think that's really important because we have to think about that so we can make it inviting for them and prepare the team to help them serve and make that work all around. Another step would be to talk with some organizations in the community so that you can partner with them and help students serve in that way outside of your church. That would be really helpful too. You can get some more action items and all the notes from this episode in the show notes. Just go to nickblevins.com/episode 24. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a rating and a review on iTunes. If you're listening right now, you can go ahead and just leave a rating and review right there in the app. Be sure to hit subscribe as well so you don't miss an episode. In the next episode, I talk with Kenny Conley. And Kenny and I talk about what is next-gen family ministry, or like what is a next-gen pastor, what is a family pastor, meaning the role that oversees birth through high school or birth through college. What is that? And how did Kenny unify the children and student staff team that he had when he stepped into that role many years ago and had to bring that team together? What did that look like? How long did it take? It was a really good discussion, so you'll love to hear that. Regardless of what role you're in, I think it takes everybody. So you don't want to miss that conversation. Be sure to hit subscribe, and we'll see you next week in the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.